Hello, and welcome to another indie author interview here on Plot Mom. Today, I am joined by the amazing Sidney Williams, who I'll let introduce himself in a moment. In the meantime, if you are watching live, please chime in with any questions, say hi, and all that jazz. We are going to be talking about keeping prose tight, which is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart because I'm horrible at it. So, Sidney, tell us who you are, and please help me learn about this.
Well, I will try. I am Sidney Williams, and I have been writing for a while. I began my first book sold in 1989, and I wrote horror novels and thrillers early on, and I've kind of done different things through the years, written comics and short stories and audio dramas and things like that. Always, trying to do interesting things. And I also had a newspaper day job for a while. So I was a reporter for a number of years, and I worked in corporate communications, which was not creatively stimulating. Didn't conform to me being really novelistic during that era. So kind of happy that came to an end, and began teaching creative writing, and that re-energized me. And I've been working with students for a number of years now, and so I've had the opportunity to work with prose and also with scripts, for that matter, and trying to help students tighten things and make sure things are meaningful. This topic does not mean that you might not look into my books and find some rambling sentences, or sentences that ramble more than this introduction even. And there was my Write Like Faulkner period that took me through a book and a few stories, I think. Tales of the wisteria blooming while the hot sunlight bursts in through the windows, and those sentences that weave and wander and everything. But I have come to tighten things up. My last book was a book with a first-person narrator, and it behooved me to give him a terse voice. And so that certainly, made me think about writing tight. And so seemed like a good topic to discuss a bit. And I'm not perfect, but I try, and certainly will try to be meaningful.
Well, that is, I think, the whole point of writing tight, is having those meaningful little sentences there. So you've been writing for a while and in a lot of different mediums. Do you think your experience in like audio dramas and scripts and short form has informed your attitude towards writing tight?
I think it has. I've talked to many writers who, early on in their writing were, very verbose and got tighter. And I've talked to a lot of people that, have said they can't write short stories. And I was that way, or, the first, earliest short stories I wrote were novellas, or they were very long. One of the first creative writing classes I ever wrote, I wrote sort of a mystery espionage story, and it was quite lengthy. And I came to really, in working with the short form over time, that helped me, I think, write tighter. Certainly. I had this down as something for an exercise that you can do even. And so I'll go ahead and mention it. And I think everybody, that writes many short stories has experienced this. There's a market that's looking for 3,000 words, and you've got 5. And that will teach you quickly to look for the words that matter. And you will often find, if you're trying to make a story fit within a certain word count, and you don't want to give up substance, that's when you really begin to analyze sentences and to begin to see, oh, wait, this is not necessary, or this could be a shorter sentence, and this phrase is not adding anything. So certainly, even if you're not doing that, that's a great exercise to take a piece of work that's longer and say, how can I cut this down? And how can I almost analyze each line and see, what can I eliminate? And that is a great learning experience. And it made me write even tighter novels where there's so much room. And we were talking before we started about, with Kindle and ebooks, the page count does not contribute to the cost the way, extra pages contribute
Yes.
to printing cost. But even with that freedom, the economy of prose, I think, is still a virtue. And so certainly being tight in short stories taught me to be tighter in novels and helped me with Cy Reardon's voice in Fool's Run, my new book.
Yeah, I'm one of those writers who I think the shortest thing I've ever written was 8,000 words. And we were very proud of ourselves because we had a budget of 10 and we wrote 8. It was very exciting.
It's exciting. And when I was first writing in the late '80s and beginning to try to send short stories out before my first novel sold, I always was looking at the markets, and the markets almost always were short because people were printing. Actually paper printing in small press magazines. It was some guy working in his garage, and he wanted to get as many authors in a magazine as he could to get more names in there and get more people with followings and everything. And it is kind of luxurious now that there's so many novella markets and everything, and it can be fun to work in that realm. I've heard it said that 10,000 words is the perfect length for the short story because you have room for characterization, you have room for story and everything. And certainly if you're writing those 10,000 words very tightly, then it really becomes a perfect form. I got to write a novelette, I guess, when you look at the word counts, about a 10,000 word Gothic romance mystery a couple of years ago for a collection called Love Among the Thorns. And that actually, I had written that 8,000 words and happily had a good relationship with the editor. And she goes, "You've got 10 here. This beginning is I don't like the beginning. It's drawn out a little bit. But I would like to see you take this to 10 and add, even more of a love story here." And so it was, interesting to get that feedback and to, again, eliminate again, the old kill your darlings thing, but there was an opening section that I was not really adding. And so I thought, okay, all of this can go. We start when it involves getting to a castle. We start when the heroine walks in the castle. Yeah. And, gave me room for more story, more of an arc for the love story, which I had ended on a hopeful note, and the editor wanted me to take it a little further. And so, I was able to take something on that first page, almost the opening image, closing image, and work that around, so that it all, opened and closed, bookended nicely, and gave us a satisfying love story and a ghost story and a mystery. And again, made it all meaningful. Now, interestingly, the same editor, I wrote a longer story called The Witch of Washington Park for a collection called Cat Ladies of the Apocalypse. And I wrote that 10,000 words. And the editor came back and said, and there was an epilogue, essentially. There was something that was alluded to that came back around. And I kind of wrote it that long because she had wanted the other story that long, and a little bit different scenario. She goes, "I don't think this epilogue is needed." So
that went away.
Build to a stopping point. And go, okay, all this goes, and it became a very tight 8,000 word story. And working with editors can be great.
Yes.
Especially if you develop a good relationship with an editor. And,
it's a pleasure. I have so many authors who are like, I hate edits. What I hate is revisions. I hate when it's alone, me and my plot, and I have to try to figure out how to fix something. Can't stand that. When I'm working with someone else, it's great.
Yeah, and it's great when when it is a collaborative process with an editor versus I don't like harsh editing. or snarky editing.
No.
I don't think that's helpful at all. I had one professor in grad school that was that way, and I considered I like to say my semester with him was the wasted semester, because it was so semantic, and it was, analyzing every word, but it was to a point that, at some
You
point you
want to
have
feel
to,
like your
yeah,
editor is on your team, that they're on your side and trying to make it better and not trying to poke holes in your work out of sadistic
yeah,
enjoyment.
not just, and yeah, in one of one of his phrases, and it was so snarky, and one of his phrases was, "Do you realize how many times you used was?" Well, I was
Very
writing in past tense, so I kind of needed it. Um, and I think certainly with editing, I certainly tried to be, I do some, especially comic script editing for people, and I try to take a very positive approach, and I think that helps writers accept edits. If
Yes.
it's kind of, you hear the compliment sandwich, which that's a phrase I don't necessarily love, but I
But it
have,
does work.
yeah, and I have done. I've never had a screenplay produced or sold a screenplay even, but I've done a little bit of screen work. By some things stumbling my way, or me stumbling into some things, but screenplay coverage a lot of times will be that it will be very positive. These are the strengths. These are where this script could be improved. And I certainly try to take that approach in working as an editor, because here are your strengths, and I call it opportunities. Here are your opportunities to polish.
I love
And
that.
if you do that, if you point out, this is good, the storytelling is solid here, but this is where you can improve, I think people become more receptive to that. And
Also,
if
it
you're
avoids
recommending,
over editing,
yeah,
because oftentimes, like, I need to know when my editor laughed, because I need to know that I need to keep that line. That line stays.
yeah.
And if it doesn't, I could cut the whole scene if I don't get that positive feedback where it actually is positive.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And when it's sentence repair at times, sometimes it gets down to that level, especially if you're trying to help somebody polish dialogue, but prose as well. If the writer is receptive to that, you see when the revisions come back. If you see revisions, you see, okay, they did accept that, and they made that, or they accepted the challenge to cut extra words in that sentence or whatever.
So I have two sides of the same question.
Okay.
So, part one, what are your tips and tricks to drafting with a mind to tight writing? And part B, what happens if you're like me and you have a monster of a manuscript that you drafted completely without any thought of being tight on your words, and you're at a point where Kindle Direct Publishing will not print your book because it's too long?
Well, I think as far as drafting with that eye, certainly if you outline, you can plan for a certain, you can plan for a certain word count, and certainly different genres are open to longer works, and the epic fantasy, the readers like those, and the see all my books over here, I have books like this on my shelf, that on my to read stack that are this thick, because there's detail, and there's plot, the expanse of the plot that readers like and respond to. But I think knowing your audience, knowing are you writing a trilogy, or are you writing a standalone, a lot of times can go into the planning, and just figuring out your arc and what your endpoint is, can be a way to work a little tighter. I'm building to this. This is where I'm headed, and you certainly can have digressions in a novel. Again, there's room in a novel, but there is uh, almost an instinctive approach, I think, that kicks in over time. And if you outline and you know story beats well, and you know what is satisfying in a story, you can concentrate on hitting those points and working with your own map toward the journey arc or whatever. As far as trimming down, it does get into the kill your darlings aspect, and I think happily, if you're a few books in, you know what readers are responding to. That can help. Yeah, being careful not to. I saw this in a presentation not long ago, but someone said, everybody knows that George R. R. Martin loves to write feast scenes. So, think about those things that you love and ask, should I keep this in because I love it, or is it something that should go? It's like my epilogue to the short story that I was talking about, or what was a novelette that became a short story. I liked that epilogue, but I didn't disagree with the editor, and certainly, when the choice is beside it being accepted for an anthology or not, then you cut,
Of
you,
course.
you cut what the person with the, holding the purse strings says. And it's, a matter of deciding if this goes, what, where do I stop that is still satisfying? If this part from the middle goes, well, what is going to fill that gap, or how am I going to work around that so that it doesn't seem like a void,
Yes.
or like something's lacking. A lot of times, the film certainly, gets constructed in the editing booth a lot of times, and a lot of times you will see a movie and you will realize that there's something, something lacking, and you find out, well, there were these scenes that were shot, and they just decided not to go with that. It wasn't, fitting the time frame or whatever, and you can sense that absence, and
Yes.
I think, yeah, if you're going to cut something, a chunk, then you need to find a way to, instead of leaving a gap, to kind of close things.
I find that when I'm revising, especially on the macro level, like on the micro level, sentence by sentence, this is less true. But I find that cutting whole scenes creates way more problems than they're usually worth. But cutting the beginnings and ends of scenes, or a chunk out of the middle of a scene, usually is very quick to tie up.
That can do wonders. And the old adage is begin a scene as close to the core action as possible, or begin a story as close to the important action as possible. I think is very true. And yeah, I think the beginning of scenes often can be jettisoned. We can begin in the middle of a conversation, or do enough to establish where things are, and not necessarily give every nuance of the conversation, the introductions, and the how are you doings, and all of those things.
Yeah, I'm very guilty of oftentimes writing scenes from the moment a character wakes up, writing all the way up to the action when I'm drafting, and then when I'm editing, cut everything up until that action,
Yeah.
just so I can figure out what the state of mind of the character is going into the action.
Yeah. Lawrence Block years ago wrote Lawrence Block's the mystery novelist. Used to write a column for Writer's Digest, and he wrote a book about getting characters where they need to be, or he wrote a column one time about getting characters where they need to be, and he talked about that he wrote a scene where a character was going to Queens or something, and he rode the subway, and he made the connections and all that, and then he realized, he got on the train, he got off the train. this is what happens. And he said, unless you're writing like the taking of Pelham 123 about how the subway system works, you get them where they need to be. And certainly, cutting extra words. A lot. I see a lot of students write all of the well, comma, da, 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 and give characters very verbose dialogue. And I'm saying, cut that. We don't talk that way all the time. We don't say all of those wells. We talk with economy because we get tired talking. And so looking for all those things to slice is helpful. And examining modifiers, I think, is helpful too, just in that razor-like focus. Do I need this modifier or this phrase that tells the reader more than they need? You will see a lot of times people trying to detail, just like with travel, trying to detail every aspect of a character's clothing or whatever. And I think it's exerting extra control, and where
like
a few points can be enough to establish the character for the reader, and we don't need to know. Unless it's Reese Witherspoon and
of course,
Legally Blonde, and with the expertise on shoes, we don't need to know what their shoes look like, or we don't need every detail.
That does draw me into another question. So obviously, we want type prose. Every time you meander off, it's a chance that your reader also meanders off and never picks up your book back up. How do you deal with changing the way you write based on the character's POV that you're in?
I think it is a matter of, and especially if you're writing third person, point of view. I think it's just being in that character's mindset, and certainly working with that character's vocabulary, that set of phrases and everything. I believe it's Donald Moss, the writing coach, that suggests, lists of words for, what does this character call a pencil? And starting from that point of knowledge about the character, I think is valuable. And then you're writing, if your character is a technologically sound, then their verbiage is going to be toward, straight toward technology. So having a good and solid notion of that character's thinking will guide the prose. Certainly some characters are going to be more verbose than others in their thinking or whatever, but we certainly can in that process also eliminate he thought to himself, and just do the thoughts. And I like to think in multi-viewpoint novels with different internal narrators or whatever, it's like writing first person in third person in those characters' minds, and just being very solid in who that character is will guide that a lot of times. With Cy Reardon, who was a first-person narrator in Fool's Run, I wanted to riff off the tradition of the hard boys. It's sort of a noir. It's got a little bit of fantasy element to it, but it's mainly a hard-boiled / noir novel. And I wanted to riff off the style of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. And Chandler's style is so beautiful, and there was a romance to the detective novel in Chandler's hands. And I wanted to honor that and yet give Cy his own voice. And Cy is a cop who has been in jail, been in prison. And so he took writing courses when he was in prison because he had time to pass. Yeah. And that prepared him, and that shaped his voice. And also, and he is a cop who wrote reports and all. So you have a little bit of that use of language in play in his his sentences, but people have really responded to. People call it sometimes size philosophizing and size. The just the overall style, and that was in part, having read so many of those novels and uh, being kind of having made it intuitive by experiencing so much of it, I guess. And certainly, I will say, and I've said this in other things I've talked about. Certainly, constant reading is the writer's friend, and looking at what's being done on the in the landscape out
Yes.
there is essential, and you will certainly learn from reading other writers, and I made a note to note I made a note to note that I think you know, there's a tendency to resist writing advice, and that's good. Everybody should writers should be rebels, but there is, especially among writing students, there's a tendency to go out and find things that contradict anything they're told. To go, see, they did it and they got away with it. See, they wrote this big book. And
instead of seeing them as the exceptions.
Yes, or seeing that they did this for a certain reason. And so I think it's important to realize, how to take advice and what advice to take, and maybe you are going to go break that rule, but to also be aware of why a writer is writing long, if they are writing detailed feast scenes, or telling us, as Stephen King likes to do, so much about a character's background or whatever. Analyze why they're doing that and why they're breaking that rule, rather than going, well, they didn't do that. And that's the sort of you and I were talking about teaching. Of course, there's a little bit of teaching, the teacher's frustration that tendency is there, but don't go find something that somebody got away with and use that as a shield. Analyze it and
use it as a tool.
Yeah, exactly. Great.
Because that's exactly what it is. There are some people who break the rules to amazing effect because it's innovative and it's interesting.
Yeah.
And for every one of those, there's 100 who broke the rules and it went very poorly for them.
Yeah. And the other thing, the kind of the counter to that is that I will see people that take every rule and adhere to them
as
so
though
specifically.
It were gospel.
Yeah, and I like to say, we're everybody's trying to do the best job they can and to make the best creative decisions they can. And this is all about, writing is all about decision making. It's about deciding what happens next, deciding what is going to be the ending, deciding what's going to, be in the character's heart. And all of it, all of the instruction and everything is just trying to help you be as informed as you can so that you make good creative decisions and so that you produce a work that is satisfying to a reader.
And there's something that I always tell my students, and I think it's so important to figure out, is that writing isn't like sculpture, where if you chip something away, it's gone. Writing is a playful art form. You can save a copy, cut 50% of the words, try going in a different direction, decide it's not great, flip it to another POV. Like, you can be playful. It's not set in stone until it's published.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that playfulness is something that I think a lot of authors, especially new writers, think, oh, I must write it correctly the first time. You don't have to write it correctly the first or the 10th time. You can try adding dinosaurs into it. There are no rules that cannot be broken in play. Define the ones that work best for you.
We have word processors now.
Yes, you don't even have to type
This is
it.
a fluid process.
Yes.
Raymond Chandler used to write on to give my notes away here, but he would write on half size. He would half his typewriter pages because he was writing on a manual typewriter and he didn't want to rewrite as much. If he changed something, he didn't want to have to rewrite as much. And
Fair.
the first stuff I ever did was on a typewriter. And so when word processing came along, it's wonderful. You can move things around and you don't have to cut
It's amazing.
and paste. And I worked on a student newspaper in days where you cut and paste it. You'd cut this paragraph and cut this paragraph and move it up and then retape it or paste it and things so that you had a manuscript that could be typeset.
That's how I actually cut words most of the time, is I have a scene list and I'll just make copies of the scene list and move things around wildly and see, is there a faster point to get from A to Z?
Yeah.
Can I cut half the alphabet and still make it make sense while still having that original version that has every single letter of the alphabet in it?
Yeah, and I have often I have a sheet of quick notes when I'm writing that helps me remember who everybody's name is and things like that. But also down at the bottom of that Word document, I will often cut. All right, this scene's going, but maybe Cy said something. If it's a Cy Reardon novel, maybe Cy said something clever, and I don't want to lose that.
Lose it.
So that all goes at the bottom, and it's there to move back over.
This week, I took a scene I had written when I was 14 out of a cut document, put it right into a different novel, and it fit perfectly. It was exactly the bridge I needed. I wrote it when I was 14. You don't have to kill your babies anymore. Your darlings can just be saved for a later date.
Yeah. And very, very little I think is really wasted in the, creative effort because it's probably going to go somewhere. There's very little that you don't learn that is, and I think a lot of times by writing a scene, you learn things and that, you will, have use of it at some point. I also find that a lot of times, speaking of keeping things tight plot wise or whatever, I find and the first book I ever wrote was a mystery novel that I wrote on a typewriter and wrote without an outline. But I found, especially as a young writer, there were things like details I would drop in. And then I would discover later in the story, that ties back here.
Love it when that happens.
Yeah.
My brain was cleverer than I was.
Yeah. And it's wonderful when that happens. And certainly, I think it's true that, and I think that's why, a lot of times you can wake up at 3 a.m. and remember,
Yes.
That's why detective characters wake up at 3 a.m. Of course, that's why they poisoned the, But your brain is always working too, and
yes. All right. Well, unfortunately we are already out of time. These, I say it every single week, and I will say it again. These go faster than light. Wow. It's amazing. Thank you to everyone who's been watching. Anita, yes, flash fiction is an amazing tool. I'm very bad at it.
That is a great point, and Flash is a great learning ground. And will certainly teach you.
But we should keep it tight. So, Sidney, tell us how to find your novels, how to support you, and where we can come learn more from you, because you're a fascinating gentleman.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. My new book, as I've mentioned several times, is Fool's Run, featuring a character named Cy Reardon, and certainly is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all of the Kobo, all the great places that you can go. I'm published by Crossroad Press, and so they do a great job of being everywhere. You can find me at sidisalive.com. That is my website, and that's the jumping off point. There are links to my Twitter, which is Sidney_Williams, and my Instagram and all of the places. And Sid is Alive Books. Facebook finally let me change my author page to coincide with everything else in my world. And so Sid is Alive Books. I had to keep books in there though. Sid is Alive Books on Facebook. Will search that and you'll find me. And search Sidney Williams writer. That usually helps. There was a diplomat named Sidney Williams and a sports figure named Sidney Williams. There are a few others out there. So Sidney Williams writer. Google that and you'll find me. Look, I love to hear from people. So send me messages.
Fantastic. Well, you've heard it. Send him messages, flood his inbox, ask him every question. You have his permission. It is here on YouTube forever.
Sure.
All right. Well, Sidney, it was an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you. Enjoyed this very much.
Have a good night, folks. We'll see you next time.